Hi friends, I'm Jeff, or my alter ego, Jeffy G, in the music production space on YouTube. Anyway, I'm doing something a little bit different here. This is a 1980 MGB that I've owned since 1982. I'm the second owner, and it's been sitting in a garage for the last 10 or 12 years, all in parts. I've brought it here to the garage at my cottage, and I have all the parts. It's a project that I've postponed for a long time. I think there's a lot of people my age that have an MGB, and you're always at this point of, should I restore it or should I get rid of it? My goal is in two phases. Phase one is just to put it back together and get it running. And then after I get it running, I'll consider phase two, which would be restoring the body, possibly getting it painted or painting it myself. Well, I'm not joking when I say it's in pieces. There's the engine, and the engine has been rebuilt. So it has, the original, it's back up to the original specs. I had installed a slightly more aggressive cam in it, and I've got two sets of carburetors. I have a Weber and I have twin SUs. These engines are 1800 cc. It's a cast iron engine, so it's heavy, and they were very low horsepower. The ones that were delivered to North America from 77 to 80 only had about 60 horsepower, and they had a pollution pump and all kinds of things on them. I removed all that stuff in 1982. Put in a cam, added a header, changed the carburetors, and I was trying to get it up around 90 horsepower, which still is very little. And even though I'm just at the early stages of getting this running again, I made the decision quite a long time ago, maybe 8 years ago, to just rebuild the 4-cylinder engine and use it for now. Some people put 8-cylinder engines in this. There was an MGB V8 that came with a Rover 235 engine. It had aluminum heads, but it only created 140 horsepower. So, not a big gain over the 4-banger for all the effort of putting in an 8. So I've been toying around with the question of, how do you get more horsepower out of these crappy 4-cylinder engines? The people that race these somehow get, 150, 160. You even hear about people getting close to 200 horsepower out of this by adding a supercharger. It's expensive to do that, and I'm not sure for just cruising around town any of that makes any sense. 100 horsepower is good. If you get this thing to 100 horse, it's reasonable. It's not going to be fast, but you're going to keep up with traffic. You still will end up with a pretty good high end of 160 or 175 kilometers per hour, which is way more than you need. Anyway, that's always a big debate for me. I recently found an article from some guys that race MGs, both in North America and in the UK. And they got a lot of tips on what you can do to increase the horsepower. Increasing the horsepower without changing the brakes, improving the suspension, adding a roll bar and some safety features is almost silly. So once you go down that road, you're spending a lot more money on a car that frankly isn't worth very much, even in mint condition. Now this MG will never be in mint condition, so it'll never attract a really high price for resale. So I'm just really doing this for me, and my kids will probably drive it, and I don't know how much it will get used or not, but having it running makes it worth a lot more than just having it all in parts. And then over here I've got the car. You can see it's up on axle stands at the moment. I just did that because the plan is to install the clutch and clutch plate on the front of the engine and then install it back in the car. The engine compartment is a bit of a mess. One reason is I was going to take everything out of the engine compartment and repaint it, and I do have to replace the engine mounts, which are kind of torn up. But you can see the gearbox and transmission is still in the back there. So I'm going to try and lower the engine in and see if I can connect it to the gearbox without having to remove the gearbox. The right side of the car has some dents, and you can see some rust. But for the most part, these body panels on this side are reasonably solid. I have to take a look at that dog leg, which looks like it's rusted and full of holes, but it's not in terrible condition on the right side of the car. Unfortunately, the left side of the car is a disaster. The quarter panels, the dog leg, this door is just Bondo. It has really If you look closely, I've taken the interior door panel off of that, and I started undoing the screws to remove this door. I have replacement door skins, which is a bit of a welding job, but at least then I would have solid metal. And this is typical of the left side. It's just all Bondo. This car was probably rolled at some point in its life, maybe before I got it, and whoever fixed it up just did a Bondo job. None of the metal was replaced. So I might need a front left fender at a minimum. And all the other body panels like the hood and the trunk and the top, I have alternatives for that. So I could replace or repair what I have. You know, looking in the trunk of these old cars is a good indicator of the condition of the bottom. In this case, the trunk's in great shape. All of the floor panels are in great shape. It has that traditional problem where the hinge has wrecked the trunk lid. So I can either replace the trunk lid or reinforce that. I'll have to decide which is easier to do. As I mentioned, the floor is good. There's no rust. Part of the reason there's no rust on the floor is that this car had a slow oil leak and just coated the bottom of this car with oil for many years. And with oil being on the bottom, nothing rusted. The interior is intact. And there's nothing wrong with the lower mechanical side of this car. I have bins of parts. These are a bunch of the cooling system parts. And I have a new radiator. And I have, of course, headers, carburetors, new cooling fan, cooling switch. All kinds of new parts to put on here. So that's where most of the work is going to be, is installing the engine back in the engine bay and reassembling the engine and just getting it running. You see over in this corner, I've got some hoods, door skins, some alternate trunks. There's the exhaust system, which is a ANSA stainless steel performance system. One of the reasons I moved it up to this garage is just to have enough room, you know, getting around both sides of it, a place to jack it up. It's easy to work on here. My garage is pretty big, and I have a lot of tools here. I've got a transmission jack and all kinds of other jacks and lifts and equipment. So kind of looking forward to that, because for years I really haven't had the ability to work on this. Not in a mad hurry to get this done, but I do have kind of a timeline. You know, I'm hoping to have it running within about 8 weeks. I think that's reasonable, and I won't be working on it full time, but once I get it running, I'll make some decisions about whether it's worth restoring or not. If you compare this to any modern sports car, it's really quite backward. Even an inexpensive Miata from the mid-90s has fuel injection, electronic ignition. Some of them have ABS. Most of them have an ECU for controlling the engine. This just has a old-style rotor, condenser, points, and a coil. I think I have a high-performance coil to up the electrical impulse. The vacuum advance on this is a vacuum. It connects up to the engine. Vacuum created by the pistons sucks the distributor forward to give you the ability to accelerate. So it's not much more sophisticated than a snowblower, but it's easy to work on, and the parts are very inexpensive, so that's a plus. When I chose to rebuild this engine, the head had a crack. And there's kind of two options. You can get the crack of the head re-welded, and then they shave down the head to make it flat and put it back on. Or you can just buy a new head that comes with all the valves and the valve assembly and all that stuff ready to go, and you just bolt it on. Well, if you look at the cost of labor at rebuilding an engine, it's just cheaper to buy a new head. And other than that, there isn't a lot that you can do. It's not an overhead cam engine like a lot of modern ones. It only has 2 valves per cylinder, an intake and an exhaust. So there's no replacement heads that say have a better way to create the combustion. You're kind of limited to technology that was developed back in the 50s. But on the plus side, it's very durable. Cast iron, doesn't really break easy, it lasts a long time, and it's easy to repair. This project has very little to do with this specific car. It's really a bit of a milestone just for me, because I have a neuropathy in my hands, which makes it difficult to use tools and pick up small bolts and washers and stuff like that. And that neuropathy extends to my feet, so I walk with a cane or a walker. So crawling under a car to work on it is something I want to do, and it really wouldn't matter what car it was. I happen to own this car, so why not get it running, and I have all the parts ready to go. And I'm hoping if I'm successful from this, it could be the start of just another hobby. I've always been interested in restoring cars, and I was planning to do that in retirement, but kind of set back by some of my disabilities. So it's kind of a test case. Car doesn't matter that much. But if you are going to work on an MG, there are some pluses. There's lots of them. The parts are readily available, and they're fairly inexpensive. You can do, it has front disc brakes and rear drum brakes, but you can redo all the brakes, the discs. You just replace all the brake parts for less than $1,000. And all that is wrenching. You don't have to be a sophisticated mechanic to do a brake job on one of these cars. Similarly, tuning the engine, if you go with the Weber, which is like a 2-barrel carb, it's very forgiving. Other than setting some jets, making sure it has sufficient fuel and air, the thing just runs. The twin SUs that I have are a little bit more complicated because they have to be synchronized, and for that it's best to have a meter that can show you how much air and fuel is being sucked into each carb. And they do increase the horsepower by 10 or 15%, but you lose that 10 or 15% in gas mileage. You're just basically shoving more fuel through the engine. And that's fine. I think you're not really driving this car to compete with a modern economy car. It gets reasonable gas mileage, but it's certainly not as inexpensive as a Toyota Corolla or a Honda Civic, which do much better, have much higher horsepower, and way more functionality with 4 seats and a hatchback and all that kind of stuff. So people who work on MGs, I think they do it a little bit as a labor of love. Either they like the car or they don't. But another factor is that it's just a very inexpensive way to start restoring a car. Most cars are going to be more expensive. Even competitors to this, like a TR6 from Triumph, a TR7, a Miata, an Alfa Romeo, or a Fiat Spider. They're all 2-seater convertible sports cars, and they're all more expensive than an MG. And the parts for them are more expensive. All of those cars I mentioned are actually higher horsepower and slightly better performing. My plan is to do occasional updates as I make progress. I have a long list of items that I've put together, 42 tasks, everything from emptying the gas to putting on a clutch to hooking up the radiator and the cooling system. So I'll do periodic updates. At least that's my intention.